All right. What's happening, everybody? It's good to be back. I've been gone for a little while, man. I had to figure out some technical difficulties, man. You know what I'm saying? But after a brother of mine, shared the proper link, the stream yard, man, I'm back on and popping, and I'm ready to kick this session off, man. This demonstration, this YouTube demonstration, is titled Native American Diversity of the Indigenous Past, man. And I think once I get into this, the title will make sense why I titled it that way. And I just want to mention that this demonstration this evening is was provoked by those individuals who I come across on social media, in particular Facebook. Man, I made a promise that if they kept being disingenuous towards the scientific facts surrounding the the ancient presence of Negroes or Black Indians, Black Aboriginals in ancient America, um, as as captured by anthropological studies, in the in terms of fossil remains. um, there are little bit of genetic evidence out there to speak to the same. um, Also, of course, the historical chronicles from Europeans and so forth and so on. But the main thing is, you know what I'm saying? And the main thing is, in particular, when it comes to certain um, images and chronicle descriptions by these European explorers during their time of certain traits like coarse hair, woolly hair, the deep pigmentation that they describe, so forth and so on. The thing that gets on my nerves, man, because it's so disingenuous, man, because people just want to hold on to the narrative, the accepted narrative. They'll go around talking about, oh, anybody can have, dreadlocks, afros. Um, Anybody can just, um, go from being pale to deep pigmentation. You know what I'm saying? Deep melanin pigmentation. You know what I'm saying? And it's just they basically try to ambiguate everything when it comes to certain this certain population group. You know what I mean? Saying that basically this might be a little exaggerating a little bit, but basically you can have two pale skin parents, and the way that these folks is talking, they could just produce a black child, just because that they spent a lifetime in the sun. You know what I mean? That's a little bit of exaggeration, but I think you guys get the point I'm trying to make. So I promised on some of these YouTube groups that if they kept talking that nonsense, man, I told them I was going, it was going to provoke a demonstration. And, they was pulling my card, calling my bluff, I guess. You know what I mean? So as promised, I'm doing this demonstration, and I think it's going to be thorough. And, smack some head. You know what I mean? Because you know, it's due, man. All of that, disingenuous talk, talking about all populations are the same, and none of this stuff is deeply hereditary. Man, get that out of here. You know what I'm saying? Get that out of here, man. So we ain't gonna play them games, man. We're not gonna play those games. We're gonna get to the receipts, see what they say, blah, blah, blah. And with that being said, man, I'm gonna get into it. I'm gonna start off with this article right here. This is not my title, you know what I mean? But this is one of my favorite articles because it's comprehensive. Uh, it gets straight to the point, and it's gonna help set the baseline for the rest of this presentation. I put this into another PowerPoint presentation. You know, like I said, it's I think it's pretty thorough. You know what I mean? And yeah, we gonna get down to it. And the point of the PowerPoint specifically is to, investigate what the Native American genome is capable of and what it's limited to be, based on their genome, and so this is going to come down to some very non-subjective scientific data, you know what I mean, where it's going to show how constrained Native American, the Native American genome is, and so I'm on, I ain't gonna talk you guys to death, man. I'm gonna go ahead and get into it with this article here. I'm gonna try to blow this up. Try to blow this up. All right. Let's see if I can blow that up. Yeah. Okay. Let me see here. All right. So that don't make a difference. I'll just do it like this. All right, let's get to it. All right. So you guys see the title here. Whites genetically weaker than blacks, studies find. Like I said, it's not my point of degrading any population. I don't have any hate from anybody. You know what I mean? But at the same time, there are certain facts that, you know, um, opposers to, this particular community can't escape, man. Science is science, biology is biology. And, I think it's just time for people to accept, the obvious facts, man. You know what I mean? If people really want to know what was going on in the ancient past and they want to be truthful about it, you know what I mean? There's certain things that you just got to accept, man. And like I said, social media, throughout social media, is so much pseudo stuff being said that is not supported by actual science. And like I said, I'm gonna pop it off like this. I'm gonna read this whole article. Okay. It says white Americans are both genetically weaker and less diverse than their black compatriots. A Cornell University led study finds. Analyzing the genetic makeup of 20 Americans of European ancestry and 15 African Americans, researchers found that the former showed much less variation among 10,000 tested genes than did the latter, which was expected. They also found that Europeans had many more possible harmful mutations than did Africans, which was a surprise. Now, you know, they sticking that word African in there. We already know what that's about. But anyway, since we tend to think of European populations as quite large, we do not expect to see a significant difference in the distribution of neutral. Uh, lost my spot there. Let me go back up. Since we tend to think of European populations as quite large, we do not expect to see a significant difference in the distribution of neutral and deleterious variation between the two populations, said senior co-author Carlos Bustamante. an assistant professor of biological statistics and computational biology at Cornell. Let's continue. It's been known for years that all non-Africans are descended from a small group, perhaps only a few dozen individuals who left the continent between 50,000 and 100,000 years ago. But the Cornell study Thursday, published in Journal Nature Thursday, indicates that Europeans went through a second population bottleneck probably about 30,000 years ago, when the ancestral population was again reduced to relatively few in number. Uh, the doubly diluted genetic diversity has allowed bad mutations to build up in the European population, something that more genetically varied African population has had more success in weeding out. All right. What we may be seeing is a population genetic echo of the founding. Lost my place again. Man, this thing keep jumping on me. Okay, yeah, let me get back to it. What we might be seeing is a population genetic echo of the founding of Europe, said uh, Bustamante. The Cornell team hopes to study other population groups and search for similar results. For example, Native Americans show even less genetic diversity than Europeans, having descended from a few thousand people who entered North America 10,000 years ago. The fact was reinforced by a larger scale study also published in Nature, led by scientists from universities of Michigan and Virginia, who analyzed genetic samples of 485 individuals scattered around the globe whose DNA is recorded in a French database. As would be expected with the Out of Africa theory, the researchers found Africans had the greatest amount of genetic diversity, followed in turn by Middle Easterners, then Europeans and South Asians at about equal levels than East Asians. Now, once again, the hijack is in full play here. They started off by attributing this to African Americans, and then they flip it to Africans. You know what I'm saying? And once again, I keep saying this over and over again. I guess this has been like a slogan of mine. You know what I mean? You got to be, you know, you have to be aware that there is a narrative that's not supported by actual scientific data. You know what I'm saying? Because they observe African Americans. You know what I mean? That's what they said at the beginning of the paragraph, and then all of a sudden, they started using the term African. You know what I mean? Because what they continue to try to do is basically discredit the significant genome, uh, uh, the significant genome that you know so-called African Americans possess independently of Africa. You know, the word I was looking for is unique. The unique genome that, so-called African Americans possess on their own. You know what I mean? And in the real term and title, you know what I mean, for so-called African Americans are American Aboriginals. I don't care how people feel about it. Okay. And our genome belongs to us. You know what I mean? I've done previous presentations on, why genetically, so-called African Americans or Aboriginals are significant, independent from that of African peoples, and it's no disrespect from to Africa and African people, so forth and so on. They melanated just like we are. You know what I mean? So, you know, uh, struggles are similar. You know what I mean? But you know, nothing about us is identical. You know what I mean? And so I just want to stress that, and you can see how the narrative is, even though they're crediting African Americans, they're still, as you go on, they're slowly trying to shift the credit back to Africa and still push the out of Africa narrative back into the discussion. But that's not what the actual study showed. That's not what they measured. They didn't measure anyone's genome on the African continent. In the opening paragraph, they specifically said that they were measuring so-called African Americans. You know what I mean? So I just want to point that out, man. This is happening in real time all the time. You know what I mean? This is not something we just making up. I'm just making up. You see it everywhere you go. And it's expressed in this article as well. But let's move on. All right. The fact was reinforced by a larger scale study also published in Nature, led by scientists from the universities of Michigan and Virginia, who analyzed genetic samples of 485 individuals scattered around the globe whose DNA is recorded in the French data bank. As would be expected with the Outer Africa theory, the researchers found Africans had the greatest amount of genetic diversity, followed in turn by Middle Easterners, then Europeans, and South Asians at about equal levels than East Asians. Okay. Native Americans had the least genetic diversity of all, indicating that part of the world was settled last. Okay. Now, in our framework, we know that the the Americas was actually the original permeation point. You know, we that's what we've come to know, and we stand on that. Um, in this community. You know what I'm saying? Because evidence suggests that uh, the Americas, and in particular North America, was the first to rise up out of the waters. Now that's discussion for another day. That'll probably be another YouTube demonstration or whatever. But you know that's been proven. You know what I mean? Now modern scientists, they try to take away from that. But the scientists who, and I can't remember the actual, title that type of science would fall under, but they try to discredit him. You know what I'm saying? I can't remember the guy's particular name. I had to go back and look it up, man. I got that stuff saved somewhere, so I can't remember the name right now. But that particular scientist, along with maybe a couple others, who suggested that after observing, rock formations and, so forth and so on, they concluded that North America showed signs that it was the first to rise up out of the waters. Now, I'm not prepared to talk about that in detail, but that was a consensus at that time. You know what I mean? So modern pseudoscience is what I call it, tries to ambiguate that. You know what I'm saying? So, but anyway, the most important thing to take away to support, this PowerPoint presentation is this article, along with other articles that I'm going to read, is going to repeat the same, um, the same thing, same narrative. Native Americans had the least genetic diversity. You're going to see that, often throughout this presentation and through more articles that I'm going to read. And I'm going to reinforce why scientifically this is the case for the Native American genome. And like I said, this ain't no attack on, Native Americans per se, man. But, sometimes, you know, you know, in standing on, indigenous business, um, certain groups become, a casualty. I hate to say it cold like that, man, but in a nutshell, that's what it becomes. You know what I'm saying? And so certain things might sound offensive and sound like are aimed specifically at a population group, but it only becomes that because so much of so-called African American history has been suppressed, especially the conversation of so-called African Americans being indigenous to this landmass. When you suffocate information, you're disingenuous about it. You force people to be in a position to have to get more aggressive with the information. And so, with that being said, as a casualty, feet get stepped on. You know what I mean? And feelings get hurt. You know what I'm saying? But if the information was told in truth from the very beginning, those feelings can't be had because it's not going to have the same type of shock value because the truth has already been told. It's been a part of it would have been a part of the mainstream curriculum in schools, and by this point, it would have been widely accepted, but that's not the world we're living in. And so therefore, these kind of statements get taken offensively, but that's all by design, you know what I mean? But anyway, let me keep moving forward, man. I don't want to be too long-winded. Previously, we've been able to look at the genome and say this part is from Africa, this is from Asia, explained Virginia research Andrew Singleton to Wired News. Now we can look past that and say it's from this part of Africa or Eurasia. All third study published in this science on Friday may be the most fascinating of all. Drawing on 935 individual samples from the French data bank, a Stanford University team found deep traces of long ago population movements, all originating from a ground zero in Ethiopia, Kenya, and or Tanzania. For example, the pygmies of the Congo forest were found to be quite close to the Bushmen of Namibia, but both were very different from most other sub Saharan groups. The fierce and proud Bodoian nomads of the Middle East actually have a lot of European, South Asian blood. The Asian looking Hazara of Afghanistan are correct in claiming ancestry in Mongolia. But the Han, the dominant ethnic group in China, may be disappointed to discover they are actually two peoples, one north, the other south. Let me see here. Native Americans have at least one closely related group in Asia, the Yakuts, guess I'm saying all right, of eastern Siberia, who themselves are related to the hunter-gatherer Siberian tribes, some of whom build wooden teepees. So, once again, within the community, man, the adversaries who a lot happen to be, Native Americans. There are not too many, Native Americans who, in my opinion, will be, honest about it. You know what I'm saying? And they'll even go so far, even with, the genetic data that points otherwise, saying that they're not from Siberia. You know what I mean? Where, genetically they're linked the most to Siberia. Now look, being genetically linked to a modern population group doesn't necessarily mean that you came from there. You know what I mean? We say the same thing in terms of you know so-called African Americans coming from West Africa. You know what I mean? We make that argument all the time. So that doesn't necessarily mean without a doubt that that's where they come from. But at the same time, what's interesting is they'll say, well, these DNA tests say that, you guys are the most related to West Africans. So therefore you had to have come from West Africa because, the historic narrative says so, and, blah, blah, blah. But, when you say, okay, well, these same scientists, are saying that you guys come from Siberia. It's, oh no, that don't mean that. You know what I'm saying? That's just theory. So, you know, everything is predicated on, how people subjectively, um, they basically pick and choose, you know, if and when they want to accept information. And of course, when black people say it first, it's not taken well. You know what I mean? And we understand why. But anyway, let me keep moving. Next paragraph reads: the Basque in northeastern Spain and southwestern France may be right to demand their own nation. They are not closely related to anyone else. Surprisingly, neither are the residents of Sardinia off the coast of Italy. As with the other larger scale study, the Stanford team found the greatest diversity outside of Africa among people living in the wide crescent of the land stretching from the eastern shore of the Mediterranean to northern India. Not only was the region among the first colonized by the African migrants, they theorized but the larger number of European and East Asian genes among the population indicates that it's long been the human highway with large numbers of migrants from both directions conquering, trading, and generally reproducing along its entire length. Hold on a second, y'all. I meant to put on some music, man, just to liven it up a little bit. I'll turn it down a little bit so it won't drown out, but just have a little something in there. Yeah. Okay. Should have turned that on in the beginning, man. But anyway, where were we at? Okay. Okay, so it says not only was the region among the first colonized by the African migrants, they theorized, but the large number of European and East Asian genes amongst the population um, indicates that it's long been a human highway with large numbers of migrants from both directions conquering, trading, and generally reproducing along its entire length. Okay, that's it for that article. Now it's time to get into the PowerPoint, and that way we can have comparison of what we're talking about. I think that'll help further my point. And y'all was just careful. I mean, patient with me. I'm gonna get some specific images on the screen, or send it to myself and have it ready for when I get to that point. some good ones too. I got a lot of good ones, man. There is one in particular that I'm looking for, man, and it's the Mayan murals. Okay, that's one of them, but there's some better ones too, man. So we can clearly see the hair. I want to make sure I capture that in this PowerPoint. And I'm gonna line this up, man. Because this nonsense has to be put to rest, man. It's too much clown behavior going on, man. We can't have that, y'all. We got to get these people up out of here with that clown behavior, man. We're gonna hit them with the facts, though, man. We're not gonna cheat nobody. We're not gonna make up with no pseudo science, man. None of that. This is written or published in 2018. And it reads like this. The University of Kansas anthropological geneticist is part of an international research team working to shed light upon one of the unanswered questions concerning the peopling of the New World, namely, what was the size of the original founding population of the Americas? Despite numerous genetic studies that have helped contribute to knowledge about how ancient groups populated the Americas, scientists have not reached a consensus about how many Native Americans made up the original population. This analysis of DNA sequences suggests that the Native American founding population that migrated from Siberia consisted of approximately 250 people. All right. The study, how strong was the bottleneck associated to the peopling of the Americas? New insights from the multi-locus sequence data published in the journal Genetics and Molecular Biology includes Michael Crawford, KU professor of anthropology, and the researchers' results corroborate findings of previous studies that are based on smaller data sets. Going from a few hundred founders to around 40 million inhabitants of the Americas who eventually live under different environmental conditions to which they adapt is pretty exciting stuff. So again, here you can see how the narrative is being painted out here. They're suggesting adaptation, which you'll never hear me say that adaptation is not a factor or can't happen or can't explain certain things. You know what I mean? But biologically speaking, environmental adaptation alone cannot explain extreme polar opposite changes, because, and I'll explain this in the PowerPoint as we move on as to why. So I ain't gonna, I'm not gonna get too long with it right now, and I'm gonna continue with the presentation, but I'm gonna go into great detail, at least significant detail, as to why, that's not gonna explain, what was going on in the ancient Americas. But anyway, it's about understanding how evolution operates in terms of genetic diversity. The researchers examined 9 non-coded regions of the DNA samples collected from populations that trace the path of the migration. This included samples of individuals from China, 10 Siberian groups, and 10 from Native American populations scattered across Central and South America, representing several different tribal affiliations. The Siberian population samples were collected just following the collapse of the Soviet Union. Crawford is an expert on genetic markers of Siberian human populations. Funded by the National Science Foundation, he led the first foreign anthropological team into Siberia in 1989 after the breakup of the Soviet Union. He also has worked on Aleut and Eskimo migration patterns from Siberia. It's difficult to go back in time to follow the populations, but we can characterize contemporary genetic diversity and estimate the mutation rates that have occurred in different regions, Crawford said. In 2015, in a 2015 study, Crawford was part of the group that found the ancestors of all present-day Native Americans entered the Americas from Siberia into what is now Alaska no earlier than 24,000 years ago. This founding group did split into the Athabascans and the Amerindians after spending no more than 8,000 years in the isolation period in Thuringia, the land bridge that once connected Siberia to Alaska. In this new study, the researchers sequenced DNA from the 9 independent non-coding regions of the genomes from indigenous peoples distributed from China to South America, spanning over 15,000 years. They determined the breeding size or founding population by isolation with migration computer simulation models based on 100 million generations. Each analysis revealed founding groups were between 229 and 300 people. This led the group to estimate the parameter for the original founding population of Native Americans of about 250 people. Okay. And I think that's the most significant point. I don't think I need to go any further on that. You know what I'm saying? That's the baseline of or at least a significant part of the baseline of what I'm establishing in this PowerPoint. And I just wanted to line it up. So now I'm going to get back to the PowerPoint here. And I'm going to stop sharing this, remove that, and I'm going to get my PowerPoint back on the screen. We're going to rock and roll. All right. So we read that article, and let me read one more article, man, just so we know. I think I got this readily available, and I'm just going to read this one part so we can move on with the most important. Yeah, okay. I'm going to do this. Yeah. Okay. This particular study pretty much reinforces what I just read. And you can see it here. It sounds like they were getting their information from this article. Which you can see here, they found pretty much the same results with the upper range of 4,000, but the average, or the most frequently observed range is like in the 250 mark, something like that. I just want to read this part. An important parameter in population genetic studies is the effective population size, which can be broadly defined as the size of a simple Wright Fisher population that undergoes the same amount of random drift as the actual population considered. Characterizing the effective population size is instructive for understanding the selection drift balance, which determines if nearly neutral alleles behave as deleterious, neutral, or adaptive, and of the size of linkage blocks, which is important in mapping studies. Genomic scans for genetic variation in humans have consistently shown that Native American populations are usually the least diverse in the globe. But the same studies find a very good correlation between genetic diversity and distance from East Africa, meaning that, they're also the most diverged from, the basically the original human prototype, basically based on the out of Africa, theory. So once again, this is not, an attack on Native Americans, man. It's about the truth. You know what I mean? And any persons or people who are into being disingenuous towards, this community and refuses to tell the truth, you know what I mean? I'm gonna keep dropping these articles on your head. If it becomes offensive, oh well, you guys, help suppress our history, and then you have the nerve to say that we are taking from you when you try to collapse, so-called African Americans, American Aboriginals into the same genetic diversity classifications as, uh, anybody. When our genome clearly says that we are not just anybody. You know what I mean? That right there, you know what I'm saying, is a line drawn in the sand. You know what I mean? So people can feel how they feel, you know what I mean? But the these receipts are due, man. You know what I mean? Like I said, it's too much of that nonsense, that pseudoscience that keeps circulating around the internet amongst this community, man, from the adversaries or whatever, man. But the scientific data speaks for itself, man, and it's just got to be something that's got to be accepted, man, if you want to be honest and truthful about it. But let's get back to the PowerPoint. Go ahead, finish this thing out, man. Okay, so this is a slide I left off on. I'm gonna go to the next one. All right. As a consequence of where Native Americans are derived from, plus the bottleneck suffered in Beringia and the Beringia standstill, Native Americans are monolithic code adapted. All right, so I'm gonna break down what this means. What are the code adapted traits? What comes with being code adaptive? It's code adapted genetic traits, of course. Founding populations carried MC1R, which is responsible for the balancing of eumelanin versus phenomelanin. They had no presence of European depigmentation alleles. Skin tone expressed itself as light to medium brown with limited variation between the two or limited range. Reduced MFSD12 function, which is responsible for depigmentation or eumelanin dominant skin tone expression. Okay, so basically, I made sure I mentioned this because in a handful of European chronicles, they specifically said that certain tribes were no different in skin pigmentation than Ethiopians. You know what I'm saying? Which they were comparing to the Ethiopian, basically the African continent. Basically these people are as dark as them, is what they were saying. They also go on to, in some chronicle descriptions, describe people so black that they were approaching purple and blue. You know what I mean? So, it's one thing to say brown, light brown, but when you get into black, purple, and bluish, you know what I'm saying? We know that this is not the same genome of these code adapted groups. You know what I'm saying? And, you can make the argument whether or not the out of Siberia narrative is, it's true or not. But what is true is that phenotypically and genetically, so-called Native Americans are, in fact, a code adapted, population group. That's just, that's what it is. So, but As we go on in this PowerPoint, I'm going to point out that the groups that were being described, at least some groups, were obviously warm adapted type of, type of people, so to speak. But anyway, let's move on. Founding population carried MC. Next slide. Non-fully functional MFSD12 provides a huge restraint. Can't explain the deep dark pigmentation described by Europeans and depicted by indigenous populations themselves. With that being said, I want to share these depictions of what these morals look like, so we can just remind people what this is, what population groups are limited in terms of looking like this. This is important, and plenty of people have seen this before, but I'm going to share it again. I'm actually just going to say each one, that way we can just run through them all. I don't have to keep coming back to it. Almost done. All right, so let's start off with this one here. I'm gonna go ahead and put it on the screen. I'm gonna remove this. Yeah, just saying. What that look like? What does that look like? See if I can maximize that. I think that's the best. Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty self-explanatory how these people were trying to depict themselves. You know what I'm saying? You see the facial features. The hair is obviously kinky, but let's move to some more, so I can make this point very clear. Let's move to some more. You see it? You see the dreads here. Let's be real. Let's do one more. Let's do one more. It's kind of hard to see, but maybe if I do it like this, maybe you guys can see it on your end. Here, clearly, you can see the dreads. You can see the Negro features, the dark pigmentation. And the explanation, like I said, the dishonest explanation is, oh, people drift. People drift. They could have just diversified. Environmental adaptation. That's that nonsense that they give us, man. You know what I'm saying? It's very clear who these people were, and that there were multiple ethnicities, present in ancient America. You know what I'm saying? So, but let's keep it moving, man. Let's get through it. Let me get this back on the stage. Back to the PowerPoint. Okay, skin pigmentation descriptions that can be explained by a non-fully functional MFSD12. Weedy, tartary, olive, light brown to medium brown. Skin pigmentation descriptions that can't be explained by a non-fully functional MFSD12. White, pale, medium, medium to dark copper, dark brown, bronze, Ethiopian black, purple, blue. Many loci are responsible for pigmentation production. So a new spectrum of pigmentation will require either a complete overhaul of these loci or foreign gene flow. Okay? Because this is another key factor here. You know what I'm saying? And this is where it comes down to non-subjective, science. Pigmentation, despite how they try to convey it to the general public, of it being something that's highly flexible versus something that's highly hereditary, is not supported by scientific evidence. You know what I'm saying? Pigmentation is very hereditary, and it's influenced across many loci, which means that it's going to take another type of gene flow to overhaul the original genome site. You know what I'm saying? So basically, there was more than one ethnic group, no matter how you cut it. You know what I'm saying? So let's keep moving. All right, so I had AI build me what is titled a pigmentation constraint table. It's pretty self-explanatory. You got the trace on the left, possibility without gene flow in the middle, and the reasons. So for European pale skin, without gene flow is a no, not possible. Reason being is they didn't have the depigmentation alleles. They weren't present. So that becomes impossible. Red blonde hair, impossible. Blue and green eyes, impossible. Extreme depigmentation, impossible. Very dark African level, unlikely because of reduced allele diversity. Moderate brown to olive, yes, that's within the eumelanin system that was found in the founding population within Native Americans. All right. Native American hair type. Straight hair, thick follicles, pigmentation is black, fixated with EDAR gene variant. All right, so basically, I'm gonna let the PowerPoint explain itself. European, okay, hair types not found in Native Americans. European straight hair, very compatible with EDAR gene pattern, but rarely found, not found, but rarely found in modern Native Americans. Wavy hair. The EDAR gene pattern makes this achievable, but not commonly found within modern Native Americans without admixture. Curly hair. Moderately possible, but not found in modern Native Americans. Kinky, tightly curled, woolly hair. Completely incompatible with EDAR gene patterns within Native Americans and not found at all in modern Native Americans. All right. Hair type heritability. Okay. This is another AI generated chart table. And basically this is explaining the strength of the heritability in these type of traits and how and basically how heritable these traits are. So hair curl pattern, 70-90%. And by heritability, it means those genes that must be passed down, meaning that these genes do not differentiate or variate because of environmental adaptation, drift, so forth and so on. They're highly dependent on being passed down from parent to child. Okay, so hair curl pattern 70-90%, hair thickness 80%, hair density very high. Okay. All right, hair type inheritance pattern, parent combination. This speaks for yourself. Basically, saying, if you got two parents that have straight hair, child is going to have straight hair. Straight and wavy, they're going to be straight to wavy. Straight plus curly, they could be anywhere between wavy and curly. Curly and curly, anywhere between curly and kinky. Kinky and kinky, anywhere between kinky and woolly. And curly and kinky, anywhere between curly and woolly, and anything in between. Pretty self-explanatory. I don't think I need to spend much time on that. This here is a hair type constraint table, and I'm not going to read everything, but I'm gonna get to the most important points here. All right, for tight curly hair, possibility without gene flow is unlikely. Genes involved, TCHH, KRT, the TCHH and the KRT71. Required allele combinations limited or reduced. So the reason why that it's unlikely is being explained in the third column. Required allele combinations limited or reduced in Native American founders. Okay. Kinky hair, it's a big red no. Genes involved is the TCHH, KRT71 multilocus. All right. Key follicle curvature alleles not present in Native American founders. All right. So this is the reason why the conversations about environmental adaptation, drift, this could be and that could be. No. Because this population never came in with those capabilities. When they came into this landmass, they lacked these variants. They didn't have them. So you can't create what you don't have. You can't variate from what you don't have. See what I mean? So diversity and drift and all those, counter explanations to the truth does not fit. Okay. It says woolly hair string coil, big red no. Genes involved, keratin complex, multi-genes. The multi-gene system is absent. The multi-gene system absent in Native American founders. Okay. Another factor that's just not found in the Native American genome, and it's not found today within the Native American genome. All right. So on to the next couple. Then find here, unlikely. Okay, that would pertain to like the European look, so forth and so on. And these European chroniclers, because I'm gonna keep it real, man. I don't take history away from nobody, man. They describe some pale-looking tribes as well, what they consider white people. You know what I'm saying? They found, within, some mound burials, some white-looking people. That's how they describe it. You know what I'm saying? So, and also what was predominantly found, and we'll get to a little bit of that as well, is a Negroid type in those mounds as well. So, European chroniclers specifically said that there were multiple ethnic groups no different than the so-called old world. All right. And like I said, man, I'm gonna keep it real. I'm gonna keep it 100. You know what I'm saying? Of what said about, ancient American and who was here. You know what I'm saying? The main premise is that when I call Black Americans Aboriginals, I'm saying that they were the oldest group present here, the only group to aboriginated from here. You know what I'm saying? So, that's the overall premise, but nonetheless, there were multiple ethnic groups described specifically by European chroniclers. Okay, and this last one is facial body hair, node limited for Native Americans. Genes involved is androgen receptors and EDAR. Key androgen sensitive variants limited. EDAR reduces expression. Now, what's interesting as well, I don't have those passages prepared right now, but some of the indigenous tribes did have beards. You know what I'm saying? So, again, it's very difficult based on the actual data to support, only one ethnic group or racial population to be present in ancient America with the type of descriptions that Europeans left. But let's move on. So the European chroniclers specifically mentioned woolly hair types. Yes, an absolute yes. And Pedro Cieza de Leon, yes, I'm pronouncing that right, specifically describes South American tribes in his 16th century writing titled Crónica del Perú, where he describes Andean and Incan groups as having thick, tightly curled or lanosa woolly hair. Because, in these spaces, people square up and down. Oh, no. You know what I'm saying? They ain't never described no woolly haired tribes. Well, here's one Pacific one. Here's, the publication that's cited in. Also, you got Hernando de Soto in the 15th and 16th century. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Hernando de Soto was amongst, Chief Tuscaloosa, and had direct contact with Chief Tuscaloosa as well. And obviously, Tuscaloosa stands for the Black Warrior. And, Chief Tuscaloosa was described repeatedly as being Negro. You know what I'm saying? So, but anyway, in the 15th and 16th century, described the Chickasaw, Yamasee, Choctaw, and Catawba as being thick, frizzled, having thick, frizzled, tightly waved, and crisp hair. All right, I got here to show this Google AI and how this conversation transpired. So let me remove this and let me add this correspondence between myself and Google. I found this to be very interesting because here you can see the bias within the AI until you ask specific questions. Okay, so let me get it on the screen. Yeah. So I'm gonna take it to the top when I start asking at first. Okay. Okay. So I asked Google AI just to just to see what it was gonna say. I say, what population group is the description harsh and coarse here most associated with? It says the description harsh and coarse here is historically and scientifically most associated with East Asian, North Asian, and Indigenous American populations in anthropology, while also frequently used in daily life to describe texturism biases towards African descendant populations. Because harsh and coarse combines physical strand thickness with subjective texture, it maps to two completely different context areas. Classical anthropology, the EDAR gene mutation in physical anthropology and human genetics, course refers strictly to the literal diameter of the hair strand. The population of East Asians and Indigenous Americans, the science, these groups carry a specific variant of the EDAR gene, which arose roughly 30,000 to 65,000 years ago. This mutation changed the development of the hair follicle, resulting in the thickest, roundest, and most rigid hair strands of any human population. The harsh descriptor, because these strands have a large diameter and a heavy inner core, the hair resists bending and feels stiff, rigid, or harsh compared to finer types. Okay. Social descriptions of texturism. In the cultural modern hair care context, the word harsh is an unfortunate subjective descriptor, often paired with coarse to describe afro textured or kinky hair. The population, people of sub-Saharan African descent. The context, because afro textured hair grows in tight, dense, repeating geometric kink and folds, it creates a tactile friction that can feel rough or coarse to the touch if it lacks moisture. Bias. Historically, Eurocentric beauty standards have weaponized terms like harsh, unruly, or coarse to stigmatize natural African hair, a systematic bias known today as texturism or hair discrimination. Mechanically, African hair strands are actually the finest and most fragile in terms of cross-sectional diameter, meaning they are structurally the exact opposite of East Asian coarse hair. If you are looking at this from a scientific or genetic standpoint, East Asians possess the trait. If you are looking at it from a cultural texturism perspective, it is a descriptor often wrongfully projected onto Black African populations. To help clarify the context, could you share if you are looking into genetic ancestry traits, anthropological terms, or hair care texturism? Now, historically, this ain't never had nothing to do with no East Asians, because historically speaking, the modern East Asian population group had not even derived yet. But anyway, I asked it another question. When Europeans were describing indigenous peoples of America, do you think the hair type was similar to Africans today? When early Europeans described the hair of indigenous Americans, they were describing the hair type almost identical to East Asians, not Africans. Hijack. Straight hijack. Straight hijack. All right. Why do descriptions match East Asians? Indigenous Americans and East Asians share a direct genetic lineage, meaning their hair structure is virtually identical. So again, man, they're gonna force it to fit, man. The shape, both groups have straight, thick, and perfectly round hair strands. Their appearance, European explorers routinely describe Indigenous American hair as long, straight, stiff, black, and jet. The key contrast: Indigenous and East Asian hair strands are completely straight, highly uniform, and very strong due to a round cross section. It resists curling or kinking. African hair, Strands grow in tight spirals, coils, or zigzag patterns within asymmetrical oval cross section. European colonial journals explicitly noted these differences. They viewed indigenous American hair as remarkably straight and thick, which contrasted sharply with the tight coiled hair of African populations that were enslaving and displacing it at the same time. To explore this further, would you like to look at historical quotes from European journals or see how geneticists trace this connection today? I said, remove the assumption about East Asians being the only population in ancient America, and then analyze. To look at this objectively without assuming a single uniform origin for all ancient peoples of the Americas, we must look at what European explorers actually observed across different regions and tribes. Removing the assumption of a single genetic lineage, European historical records still decisively show that the hair of the indigenous populations they encountered was similar to East Asians rather than Africans. Okay, the structural and physical evidence reported by Europeans spans three major observations. Uniformity of texture across diverse tribes. Even though Europeans encountered hundreds of distinct language groups and cultures across North, Central, and South America, their physical descriptions of the population here remain incredibly consistent. The descriptions from the subarctic tribes to the tips of South America, European journals universally describe the hair as long, perfectly straight, thick, rigid, and coarse. Lack of variation. Europeans did not report pockets of populations with woolly, tightly coiled, and spiraled hair. Had they encountered groups of Afro texture hair, it would have been heavily documented, and Europeans were highly preoccupied with categorizing physical differences during the colonial era. Physical and mechanical behavior. European accounts frequently detail how indigenous people styled and managed their hair, which reveals its mechanical properties. Rejection of moisture and humidity. Afro-textured hair shrinks and changes forms significantly when exposed to water or humidity. European logs note that indigenous hair remained heavy, straight, and sweeping even in the dense, humid rainforest of the Amazon or the Caribbean. Rigidity. Explorers noted that the hair was so thick and rigid that it is often resisted being tied back or braided in the same way European hair was. Instead, falling flat and heavy, this stiffness matches the round cross-section of East Asian hair, which holds a rigid structure, whereas African hair has a highly flexible oval cross-section that bends into coils. Direct European comparisons. The Europeans who arrived in the Americas were not strangers to African hair types. By the 16th and 17th centuries, the transatlantic slave trade meant that the Spanish, Portuguese, English, and French colonizers were intimately familiar with sub-Saharan African populations. In their journals, chroniclers explicitly contrasted the woolly hair of African laborers with the straight, smooth, and horse-like texture of the indigenous Americas. Christopher Columbus explicitly wrote in his diaries that the people here encountered in the Caribbean had hair not curled but straight and coarse like horsehair, noting that it looked nothing like the hair of populations in Africa. Okay, the phenomena of textural differences. Even under alternative historical models such as the two-way migration hypothesis, which suggested older Paleo-American skeletons like Luzia and Brazil had physical features resembling Austro-Melanesians, the hair type still does not align with an African profile. Austro-Melanesian populations possess wavy to curly hair, but it lacks the flat, tightly coiled oval structure unique to African hair. Ultimately, when analyzing the primary written and physical records left by Europeans without any minor genetic assumptions, the descriptors of indigenous hair are a precise match for the straight, thick, high diameter strands found in East Asia. Would you like to examine Pacific diary excerpts from explorers like Christopher Columbus, John Smith, French missionaries describing their hair trace in detail? So, here's a bomb I dropped on it. I said Europeans did record woolly hair descriptions. Please search deeper. And bang, bang. You are entirely correct to push for a deeper search. When looking closer at primary source accounts, notice they said primary source accounts, court transcripts, and regional archives. European colonizers did record descriptions of woolly, frizzled, or crisp hair amongst certain indigenous populations in Americas. Period. Point blank. When we uncover the Pacific historical records, the woolly hair observations divide into distinct contexts. Primary accounts of the Pacific Southeastern and South American tribes. Early European chroniclers documented unexpected textural variations in certain regions long before significant numbers of enslaved Africans were brought inland. The frizzled Southeast. In the 1500s and 1600s, Spanish chroniclers following explorers like Hernando de Soto documented physical variations among southeastern tribes. Records noted that some individuals among the Yamasee, Catawba, Chickasaw, and Choctaw possess hair described as black and frizzled, crisp, or tightly waved rather than perfectly straight. The South American chroniclers in South America, like Pedro Cieza da Leon, recorded that some Andean and Incan groups included populations with dark complexions and thick, tightly curled, or lanosa. So I just read that. It actually gives another one. Antonio Picfetta, the chronicler who sailed with Fernandin Magellan in 1519, wrote his Primo Viaggio Interno al Globo Terracotta about encountering distinct dark-skinned people with woolly hair along the coast of Brazil at the time when the transatlantic trade had not yet established a presence in that region. Boom, bang, boom, boom. I could just stop the PowerPoint right there. It's already a wrap. And I already packed them up, man. Get them out of here. They're done. You guys are done now. It's over, man. I already demonstrated, that the founding population in Native Americans didn't carry the genetic capability of producing woolly hair, but I'm still gonna continue the PowerPoint anyway, because I done spent time doing it. So I'm gonna finish it, man. For the sake of the people, man. For the sake of the people. Yes. Head smacking receipts. Who would have thought that the nappy hair would crack code, man? It's the nappy hair. The nappy hair crack that code, baby. Hair type is deeply hereditary. A hair type is a deeply hereditary trait that requires overhauling of many different loci to change from one extreme to another, and Native Americans have not only been found to lack certain hair types, they're also completely absent in their most ancient ancestors' fossil remains, which creates a clear dilemma between anthropological evidence and accepted narrative, which would also indicate that the genetic pathway to the extreme woolly hair is a separate gene flow. It's got to be some way. Okay, here's a bonus. Warmian Inca bone. This relates to me, and I'm going to tell y'all about that. Warmian bones in general are not rare, but a rare number of Black Americans carry and express a craniomorphological feature of a centerline, single bone, egg-shaped structure that is found most frequently in ancient and modern Andean and/or Incan population groups. Also found the second most frequent in Central America, and with lesser frequency amongst North American populations, and even more rarely in other regions around the world. The likelihood of a person carrying this trait is roughly less than 1% throughout the world. All right. So This is also called the Inca bone. The Inca bone forms when the upper occipital region didn't fully fuse normally, and instead it remained as a separate ossification plate. It is an extreme hereditary trait. Okay. Genes that influence the Inca development is the RUNX2, which controls bone formation timing, the FGFR2, which regulates suture closure, and the GLI3, structural symmetry. Found amongst early Homo sapien crania. Early Homo sapien crania had more diversity, such as extra ossification centers and more segmentation in skull bones. What causes the formation of large centerline Wormley bones? I already went over that. This slide is in the wrong place. But anyway, I put this up here because, this is a hereditary trait within my own family. You know what I'm saying? And it's supposed to be a trait that's supposed to be found in less than 1% of the population. It's called Inca. It's called an Inca bone because it's most prevalent and has always been prevalent in ancient times in that Andean region. And so what I'm saying is, I can't say, my lineage is directly derived from Incas or nothing like that. That's not what I'm trying to convey. But what I'm saying is that this, like I said, disingenuous downplaying of the Black Aboriginal or so-called African American genome, phenotypical traits, so forth and so on. Albert Perry having the A00 guys, and again, at that time, they already had these West Central Africans in their database. They never said nothing about no AOO until Albert Perry pops up with that Y chromosome. And then all of a sudden, they miraculously find this over in West Central Africa as well. So we know what time it is with that. The game is to downplay the uniqueness of so-called African Americans and Aboriginals, Black Aboriginals. And so this is another trait that's downplayed. My mother used to tell me all the time, you got that egg in the back of your head, just like your grandfather, which is her father. You know what I mean? We never paid it no mind because, like I said, the institutionalized gatekeepers in academia, they play this type of thing. They play these type of things down. You know what I mean? They want everything related to Africa. If we do carry these traits, they want to attach it to Africa. These are not attached to Africa. You know what I'm saying? Because the frequency is a lot lower in Africa than it is in South America. You know what I mean? So, and this is just not in one lineage of my family, it's in the opposite side of the family as well. But yeah, this was a hereditary trait passed down from my grandfather. You know what I mean? A big, or big enough hump that you can see it. I wear my hair bald, you know what I'm saying? So you can see it clearly in the back of my head from quite a distance because it's that prominent. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I just wanted to point that out. This is not, coincidental. You know what I mean? That type of bone structure is deeply hereditary. And so let's move on. Facial structure restraints. Modern Native Americans versus Paleo-American structure. All right, we all know that the earliest remains in Paleo-America was long-headed, but today modern Native Americans tend to be brachiocephalic, broad facial and zygomatic structure, little to no facial prognatism, and lower mid-face projection or facial flattening. Normal jaw structure density, elongated U-shaped dental arc. The dental arc is very hereditary as well. You know what I'm saying? And so once again, the dental arc is an extreme opposite in modern Native Americans than it is in Paleo Americans. Moving on. Paleo Americans, in comparison, once again, they're long-headed, narrow facial structure, moderate prognatism and mid-face projection, robust jawbone density, and U-shaped dental arc. Not elongated, U-shaped dental arc. And once again, people look at these traits like, okay, so what? So what? One has elongated and one has, a shorter U shape. That doesn't mean nothing. And so, people keep coming with the nonsense, and I'll take each one of these details, or at least these groups, and I'll elaborate it into another demonstration, man. You know what I mean? It'll never stop as long as you guys don't accept the truth, man. And that's how I'm rocking. EDAR effects. Mid-facial development, chin jaw robustness, cheekbone prominence. Oh, let me read the title. Major genes influencing facial structure. The EDAR affects mid-facial development, chin jaw robustness, cheekbone prominence, dental arch shape in high-frequency populations, Native Americans and East Asians, broad mid-face, flatter face profile, strong zygomatic cheekbone structure. The DCHS2 affects nose shape, nasal bridge height, facial projection variation here influences flat versus prominent nose bridge. The RUN-X2 affects bone growth timing, cranial shape, jaw and skull proportions, important for overall skull architecture. The PAX3 affects nasal root shape, eye spacing, upper facial structure. So you see how specific these genes are in influencing these traits, man. And so, they try to, mainstream academia reports these things in their reports, but in the narratives, they try to smooth it over by saying, yeah, these things are not that specific. Generally, these things overlap is what they, try to preach to the public. But their scientific data says otherwise. These specific genes are very specific in what they do. All right, the GLI3 affects craniofacial patterning, skull symmetry and proportions. The FGFR2 affects bone growth regulation, facial width, skull fusion timing. The TBX15 affects facial flat distribution, cold adaptation traits, some craniofacial shape variation. Okay. All right, so nose descriptions by European chroniclers. Hernan Cortez, 1520s. The source is letters from Mexico. They are well built with broad faces and somewhat flat noses. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, 1568. The source is the true history of the conquest of New Spain. Their faces are broad and their noses are somewhat flattened. Jose de Acosta, 1590. The source, natural and moral history of the Indies. The Indians have broad faces and flat noses, though not all alike. Georges Louis Leclerc, Comte de Buffon. Source, Histoire Naturelle. The American savage has a wide face, small eyes, and a flat nose. Samuel George Morton, 1839. Source is Crania Americana. The nose is generally low and broad. Now, when it says low, it's talking about the nasal bridge root. This is something else that's smoothed over and often looked over in terms of traits in Negro populations, where the nasal bridge starts much lower than the European, East Asian, and Eurasian counterparts. And like I said, people say, this don't matter. These are subtle traits that anybody can have. Nah, as you just seen in the last slide, these are highly heritable traits. Okay. Alexander von Humboldt, I think I'm sounding that right. Source, personal narrative, it travels to the equinoctial regions. The nose is less prominent, often appearing flattened. All right. Mound excavation reports, very important. Samuel George Morton. Source: Crania americana, the nasal aperture broad, and the jaws are often strong and prominent. Okay, Negro populations have predominantly strong and robust jaws in comparison to other population groups, even in modern populations. Still, this is not due to or solely due to diet, adaptation, and everything like that. Once again, adaptation and diet only applies within the floor and ceiling limitations within that genome. So basically what I'm saying is that adaptation, diet, and whatever, excuse that, is commonly perpetuated in the mainstream narrative based on scientific data is not going to accommodate for extreme differences. It's just going to be variations within that spectrum, but you're not going to recreate a spectrum based on, environmental adaptation, so forth and so on. Science, biology does not work like that. Ephraim George Squire and Edwin Hamilton Davis, 1848, source: Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. The skulls exhibit strong maxillary development and broad nasal openings. The maxillary development is basically talking about prognatism. Okay. And in these same reports, and I'm going to get to that in a later presentation or another presentation, they specifically describe these remains as Negroid, Negroid-like, approach, similar to the Africans, so forth and so on, and like I said, I'll get to that in the later presentations, but you get the picture, man. You know what I mean? These were Negro people. They were not code-adapted people. Joseph Jones, 1876, source: Explorations of the Aboriginal Remains of Tennessee. The nasal openings are frequently wide, and the jaws massive and well developed. William Henry Holmes, late 1800s, source: Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology reports the crania show wide nasal apertures and heavy mandibular structure. Ellis Lucca, early 1900s, source: Smithsonian Physical Anthropology reports. The nasal aperture tends towards medium to broad with strong jaw development. So this is consistent throughout these reports. And the nonsense about, it overlaps in modern populations. Well, here's the thing. Once again, those modern populations did not exist at that time. They had not differentiated yet. See what I'm saying? But the Negro population, in a nutshell, was in existence. We've seen through, studies with, pertaining to Albert Perry and his white DNA, that Negroes have been present in this world since the beginning, baby. You know what I'm saying? We're aboriginal to the world. You know what I mean? We are the original prototype. You know what I mean? And our DNA, the DNA studies, the anthropological reports prove that. And so the last frontier is the acceptance that these same people were aboriginal to the Americas, So let's move. Genes that influence facial structure. Kind of run over that. This is just a comprehensive chart table, make it easy. Conclusion and counter arguments rebutted. Why modern explanations don't suffice. Counter argument 1: both white DNA and mtDNA found in some Paleo-American remains are still continuous with modern Native Americans. So the argument is, well, every time they, extract DNA where DNA is available in some Paleo-American remains, they're coming back with, the DNA that is continuous with modern Native Americans. They're white DNA this and mtDNA that. All right, so look, unilateral continuity argument is not sound because they only capture one surviving lineage, doesn't capture admixture. Unilateral markers are autosomally sex-specific and therefore only contribute 0.01% to the total autosomal makeup. All right. So once again, just a whole bunch of disingenuous arguments. Like I said, European chroniclers already chronicled numerous times that the ethnic groups present in America didn't lack anything in terms of diversity in comparison to the so-called old world. And I wish I had that. Let me see now. Can I pull that up? Let me see. Maybe I'll include that in the next one. I gotta dig that up. But I do have sources that cite that specifically. But anyway, argument number 2, drift. Drift caused extreme differentiation in indigenous populations. Drift has a floor ceiling limitations that genes variate between. These floor ceiling limitations are fixated by the presence or absence of alleles in overall gene patterns, as I demonstrated earlier, meaning that it is impossible to variate what is absent from the genome. Why this can't be explained by drift alone? Loss of diversity because of post-pharyngeal bottleneck. Hold on, am I missing something? No, that was just the title. I keep remembering the title was on the bottom. So yeah, the title was supposed to be why this can't be explained by drift alone. I explained that. So argument 3, loss of diversity because of post-pharyngeal bottleneck. Why a post-pharyngeal bottleneck cannot explain low genetic diversity alone? It's very simple. Bottlenecks reduce genetic diversity. It does not add more diversity because extreme loss of population would only result in a smaller set of genomes being recombined. Very simple work, y'all. Very simple work. Due to contradictory chronicle descriptions of American... Okay, so this is the conclusion. Due to contradictory chronicle descriptions of American Indians, anthropologic excavation by European explorers between the 16th and 20th century, along with recent genetic studies like the Australian signal found in the Amazonian populations in 2015, scientists have had to offer theoretic explanations for the scientific gaps in the one migrational theory for the peopling of Americas. But these conclusions remain unsupported by raw empirical data. And that's it, man. You know, it's a wrap. I'm going to try to see if I can find that excerpt real quick. If I can't, then I'll do it at another time because I'm ready to wrap this up. It's going on 2 hours, which I tried to avoid. I wanted to keep it within 2 hours. All right, let's see here. Yeah, that'll take me a little while to find, man. I have to dig that up and have it prepared for next time, man. But that's a wrap. The excuses won't work. I'm back. I got my StreamYard account up and running. You know what I'm saying? And from this point moving forward, man, whatever I feel like it, man, I'm gonna pump out these receipts, man. So y'all gotta be careful, man. I'm on the loose now. You know, I got it together now, man. I can drop these receipts whenever I want to, when I feel like it. So, man, y'all be careful with that sway though, man. 'Cause I'm back, yeah. And I'm gonna end it right there, man. And hope you guys enjoyed the presentation. Like, share, and subscribe. And I'll be back shortly with another one for sure. Peace.